Hey, it's Greg Chambers. Welcome to this. Let's see, today is Thursday, August 24th. August, I'm not trying to jump too far ahead into the year. Oh, man. I gotta start this over. Hi, it's Greg. I'm backing out. Okay, so that was a little bit of a coffee snafu where I spilled, but I fixed it. I think I've mopped most of it up, and I saved the keyboard, which is the important part. This is dealing with price objections and complex sales. So this is number 10 in a series of teleseminars that I've been doing. And this one is for, well, basically anybody in business development. So if you're selling, and if you can define your sale as, if you define it as complex, it's for you. This is how I define complex. I use the grid and I put it out on the page. I'm sorry, I have to record this earlier than the live recording time because I am taking a child to college today. So if you look at the buyer product complexity grid, on the scale of product complexity moving from not complex to complex, not complex maybe being QuickBooks. If you just think about it, if your job was to sell QuickBooks online, that's not a complex product. It's complex, but buying it is not complex. All the way to an enterprise level system like Oracle, right? That is much more complex on the product complex side. We're going to be aiming towards that selling of the complex sales or service. And for buyer budget control, that's what I map the grid against. That goes all the way from, at the lowest end is I have a set budget. So we say, Greg, you have $500,000 to spend this year, period. That is low on the buyer budget control. I just don't have much control. I can go ask for more money, but I don't get to prioritize it. On the flip side is when you're running the company, for instance, you can say, if it's good, I'm going to find a way to, I'm going to find the money, I'm going to reallocate it, right? So I'm going to take it from Greg's budget and I'm going to give it to Janet. That is high on buyer budget control. So if you take those two ideas, which is high buyer budget control, so the people you're talking to have budget prioritization ability, and the product or service that you're providing is complex, that's what this is for. And the reason I'm calling this, it's not about the price, is because it's not. In the end, price is important, but it's only one part of that equation. It seems like I've been bumping into this more and more this summer. One client telling me we need to hire more people, and then I look at the P&L and I think, every time we add more people, we're just compressing margin, and these people don't have an idea of where the price is coming forward and how it translates into margin. So a lot of these are not like, this is not a personnel problem for growth. This is a pricing problem for growth. And you need to give yourself enough margin in order to grow the business. And I could talk all about that. I learned that in the apparel business. If you didn't build in enough margin for your product, you could be the low seller, but then it's hard to grow as the low price seller, as opposed to being a higher margin seller. There were more avenues that were available to you to increase sales. So one way that we could attack this problem is, of course, do what my clients suggest, right? And we try to aim for that operational efficiency where we can support low pricing and more margin compression, or we work on the other side. And that's what this is about, is working on the other side. So we'll refer to this grid. I have one more grid that we're going to refer to, but for the most part, I'm going to cover 4 big ideas around pricing, dealing with price objections. And we're going to deal with price objections by bringing them up in the beginning as opposed to the end of the sales cycle. And then I've got some immediate tactics that you can take with you. So I apologize if I'm rambling. If you can hear me, I'm just a tiny bit nasal, more nasal than usual. And it's allergies. It's allergy season. It happens to me twice a year. This one is my fall hay fever that I'm just recovering from. So earlier in the week, or later last week, I could hardly talk. I'm starting to feel better today. So I've got 4 big ideas. We all want the same thing. There are 2 price discussions: risk from a client's perspective and managing your risk from your perspective. So let's get into those 4 big ideas really quick. The first one is we all want the same thing. And what I mean by that, the big idea there is that you and your clients want the same thing, which is a solution that solves the problem, right? Or helps them realize the opportunity that they're after. And that I just find that it's easy to forget once we get into a sales situation on both sides. I've been on the other side as a buyer too, where you kind of forget that, we're both actually after the same thing in the end. If we can learn to trust each other, we're after the same thing. And that's important because if we have the same goal, we should be able to get to the same place. It serves as a reminder that we need to remind ourselves, and we need to remind the other party that we're both after the same thing. And the reason we know that this is important, when it comes down to price is only one. This is how you do it, is if you want to talk about how we want the same thing, you need to get off of price being the only resource that is important to them. It's the one that's easiest to identify, but there's also going to be two other big ones: time frame and personnel. And we'll talk more about this as these next 40 minutes roll on, but it's timeframes, personnel, and budget. So yes, money is important. Is it maybe more important than the other two? It could be, but God, I've run into more problems with, we have too many resource requirements on the personnel side for the solution to be implemented, and also the time frame. Oftentimes the time frame is super short, or the time frame is for the solution to actually take effect, especially with some of these lead generation solutions that I do. The time frame is so long that it doesn't work for the client. What's funny is it does, 2 years later, it works when it's implemented, but leading up to it, those 2 years are long years leading up to it. But think about this as just check it against your logic, right? What happens if we have the perfect solution on all sides? Is it good for the client? Is it good for the client when the solution is right? Well, of course, because it provides the solution to the problem that they have, or it gives them the opportunity that they had identified that they were going after. And from the seller side, it's perfect too, right? Because if it's the right solution, then you made a reasonable amount of money on providing the service or product, and you have a happy client, right? They're not leaving you. On the flip side is, if it's not perfect, let's check the logic on that. If it's not perfect, we can say that from our perspective, that's an unhappy client, right? The good news is if it's not the perfect solution and the client didn't share all the resource restrictions or any of the changes that happened up front, they usually take the blame for it. I'm kidding. No client is ever going to take the blame. They're always going to blame you. So from our perspective, we need the right solution, because otherwise it's going to be all our fault anyway. So we might as well invest the time up front and make sure that it's that we're after what they actually need. On their side, they whatever problem or opportunity that they're chasing, if the solution doesn't get there, then they're not happy, right? Because they still have the problem or the opportunity is still unrealized. So that's how we know that we both really do want the same thing. And that's why we need to keep that in mind. And the way to do that, like I said, is get off of talking about price being the only piece that we're worried about, and put equal weight on personnel requirements and also time frame requirements, especially time frame. A time only goes one way, and we can have a long discussion about that, but it's really hard to shorten time frames. Most of them just get lengthened. Okay, so that's big idea number one. We all want the same thing. Here's big idea number two. There are two price discussions. There's two separate ones. And so, as you know, if you followed me, I have done a lot of, studying about linguistics. I find it interesting, even though I'm terrible with languages, but I do like to understand how it is that we communicate. And the first price discussion happens at what language is, which is what we call a high level abstraction. So since it is a high level of abstraction, it is not all it is I can't think of a better word for it, ballparking, right? Price should never be a surprise, but a lot of failed proposals, when we dig into it, we realize that we never talked about price until we gave it to them, or the client never really gave us an idea of what price was, because they didn't know, right? They were until they got right down to it, and then they didn't have a budget for the project, or they just don't believe that that's gonna happen, right? So that's the importance of bringing up the abstract version of your price early and first, is so that you can move past it and find out if it's going to be a fit. My biggest problem when I work with clients is I tend to, it's sticker shock. I'm sure they look, well, I've been told, great, it's just way too expensive. I think I can get that cheaper elsewhere. A statement like that, when you unpack it, just has so many things that I did wrong for them to end up that way. Most of it being that they have a hard time differentiating me from the rest of the market. But one of the other reasons is that upfront, I never really got price cleared. So if I said upfront $50,000, and why do I do it? It's easy. If I say, that my projects are between $50,000 and $100,000, there's a segment of people that I meet, the vast majority of people I meet, that they're just not willing to spend that kind of money, or they don't have it. The size of the business doesn't have it, or they just don't invest that much in outside help. And I didn't know that right away because I need to move on before I invest too much time and get my hopes up too much on the front end. And even though I know that the value provided is far in excess of the investment required, right? Or else I don't enter into the project. I don't enter into a project if there's only going to be $50,000 of value and my cost is $50,000, that's a bad economic decision. So knowing that, I've bought into, and the clients have bought into too, the idea that it's not a fit. We can ballpark that and we can figure that out early on, and we can end the discussion. I can help them by sending them to other resources where they may be able to get close to what it is that they're after, but it will be a much better fit when it comes to budget in addition to personnel and timeframes. Because the one thing that a client can manage, which is the big number 3, the reason why price is always so important in discussions, or why we end up getting stuck on it so much, is because that's the easiest way for a client to manage risk when outcomes are unknown, right? Because it's the future. We don't know for sure that these things are going to provide what it is that we want them to. The price is the one thing we can control going into it. So what that means is, as a buyer, you need to manage what you can. And one way to do that is by checking the price that it is that you're paying. And the reason that's important is because every dollar you spend, right, it's a dollar saved is a dollar earned. A dollar sold is 10 cents earned. So I get where the risk is. I was just talking to a friend, and we were talking about a merger so he had bought a company 2 years ago. Excuse me. It could be 18 months. And I asked how it was going, and he said, "Oh, it's terrible." And of course, so now I have to say, and why do you say that? Well, it's terrible because everything that we hoped would happen didn't happen. And why do you think that happened? Well, because I didn't ask a particular question on the front end of that during due diligence. He didn't do the proper due diligence, and it came back to bite him when some key clients left because he had never asked when the termination date on their contract was. What that will do is, next time that he gets into a negotiation, next time he considers expanding his business through acquisition, he will absolutely not overpay for whatever that next company is, right? Because that's the easiest way for him to manage the risk. That question that he thought he was being extremely thorough. We had actually worked on a couple of mergers together, so I know he's thorough. It's the phrasing of one particular question he gets burned on. Well, guess what? Next time going forward, he's always he'll walk before he decides to take on another event like that because he feels it's been expensive and that it wasn't worthwhile. It's his way of managing risk going forward, right? So that makes sense. So that's risk from a client's perspective. So even when you have the two perspectives, right? When we say there's two price discussions and two views on price, that high level abstraction, when I say $50,000, there's people who that's too risky. Even if I knew 100% that was going to work, Greg, I don't know that I could do it because because our revenues are $50,000, right? So if you're a startup. So what we do is we manage that as a buyer, manage risk. And so as a seller, how is it that we can manage risk, which is big idea number 4. And the way you can manage your risk is by talking to more prospects. It's quite simple. It's hard to find a semi-interested prospect. It's really hard to find a good fit. And so the way to manage your own risk is you need to have a lot of prospects. And that's important because if not, then you get desperate, right? You become the factory that is running, and you say, this thing can't shut down. It's more expensive to shut this down than it is to keep it going. So we'll take any business at this moment just to keep the factory going. Once you get into that, unless you're being honest with yourself and recognizing that, and the only reason I'm doing this is because I'm too bleeping stupid to figure out how to get full margin business. And so I got to figure that out. But right now I just need to keep the factory going. You're going to start compressing your margins, right? You're going to start doing what some of my clients have resorted to for growth, which is we just need to keep adding more salespeople. We need to keep digging around for more business. And wow, margins keep getting compressed all the way along. What is happening? I'm not sure. But if we just keep getting bigger, maybe it'll take care of itself, because operationally we can be excellent. When, you got to remind them, it's not about what your top line is. It's about what you are able to take home, right? And I'm sure some super finance guys can argue with me on that point, where you can make a lot when you have a lot of money flowing through the company. You can make other things happen. I'm not quite smart enough for that. So I always just look at what is the bottom line. What is it that we're actually taking home? I'm finishing up this book that I've been writing, The Human Being's Guide to Business Growth. And when researching all my old notes, one of the things that I used to tell everybody, and I still do, and I still believe it, is that the problem with most sales books is they focus on they focus on closing. They focus on getting people through that last part of the decision-making process, helping sellers and buyers get through that last part of the process. And unfortunately, that's it's 20%. It's in a very important 20% of the process, but 80% of sales is prospecting, and it's getting in front of the right people. My business works better when I am in front of 2 people who can afford my services every week. If that doesn't happen, then I find myself looking longingly at projects that are small and that take a lot of time, but at least they would provide some income. You can manage your risk by talking to more prospects and take a lot of pressure off of any one particular transaction. That's a way to do it. Those are the big ideas when it comes to dealing with price objections. One is don't put too much emphasis on it, right? Because we all want the same thing. We want a solution that's going to work. And if price is a sticking point, then that is a reason why it won't work. And we can explore that, to find out whether it's a terminal issue or if it's something that can be fixed. There are always going to be 2 price discussions. One is early, and it's, are we even in the same ballpark? That one gets avoided a lot because we don't want to find out that we're not in the same ballpark. I think that one's really aimed at squarely right back between my eyes. That's the Greg Chambers discussion. Greg, you need to qualify up front. And then there's 2 ways to manage risk. The client can manage risk through what they pay. So knowing that as a seller going in, it just always makes sense, right? It makes sense to take a look at it from their perspective. The reason that they don't want to overpay for any particular solution is because it's the one thing that they can control going into it. Now, what you can control is that you can actually talk to more people. And so you take the pressure off of them. If it's not a fit, you can walk away, and and you can find the people who better fit your market. There you go. That's 4 big ideas. And I did that in about half the time, which gives me half of our time to roll through some tactics. So these are ways that you can actually make those 4 big ideas come to fruition. And one is we'll talk about matching price to value. One is we'll talk about managing working with the flow of money. 3, we'll just briefly touch on setting price, then ballparking price. Those are 2 different tactics we can talk about. And then how to finalize the price. We'll talk about identifying buyers and separating sales from marketing. So I'm going to roll through these pretty quick. The first one, matching price to value. If the price to value equation is way off, there's something that's not right. Years ago, I worked at a direct marketing agency, and it was common knowledge in the world, right? Everybody you talk to, they would say, oh, direct mail, because direct mail was big and we sold a lot of direct mail services. They would say, I should expect a 1% return, and that's a good response rate. And that was wrong. It was actually wrong. The correct return was to look at the cost of the mailing and then look at the actual return that came in sales, and then use that to determine whether or not, how far off you were from realizing return on investment. And then there was a whole nother equation that we did with multiple mailings and measuring it over time. But the idea that there was always this, we were always battling this idea, and I still battle this idea, that there is a solution out there where I can spend $10 and I can get $200 in return, which is which is a tremendous return on investment. And those things are out there. There's just not very many of them. And really what ends up happening is when you have big returns on investment like that, in order to grow your business, you need to blend them with the really low returns. So in your portfolio of things that you're generating return on, right, you're going to have some things that are just barely give you dollar for dollar. At the same time, you're going to have these things that give you, 200 to 1 returns. In going after that, when you're talking to people, if they are talking about needing a solution that solves a problem, how much is this problem costing you? Well, it's employee turnover problem. We have, I employ 2,500 people and we've got a 40% turnover because it's hardcore sales, and we'd like to get that down to 20%. And so we put the numbers to that and we come up with, I'm just going to round this up, we say $1 million. And I say, okay, what are we willing to invest in that? Normally what I'm used to is that something along those lines, all in, not just my fee, but everything else that goes into it, you're going to be investing somewhere around $250,000, $300,000. Sounds about right to get that kind of benefit, because once it's locked in place, you get it for multiple years, right? So at that $1 million benefit, you get over 3 years. And so that's where I come up with that $300,000, just back of the envelope math, ballparking. And if they say, no way, we never do anything like that, we're looking for something, we have $5,000 to invest in a training program for our HR people or for our managers that's going to reduce turnover. That's what I mean by matching price to value. If the price and the value are way off like that, you gotta figure out what the problem is, why it's like that. And then, there's a lot of things, probably not talking to the right buyer, but also you're just never going to win that. Cause even if you give the absolute best, I bumped my chair again. Even if you give the absolute best training, the chances of them actually realizing that benefit is low. So that's matching price to value. You should always be aware of how those two things work together. And you're always testing your gut on it. If it's a $50,000 a year tax benefit that they get, which is straight to their bottom line, and they're unwilling to invest $20,000 in your solution to get it, there's something off. Either A, they probably don't believe that, there could be a lot of reasons, but instead of getting at all those little questions, just always remember to match price to value and double check it against your own knowledge of what's realistic and how it works. That helps. And then part of talking with this next one, going with the flow of money, that ties into who it is that you're talking to. And oftentimes when you have a price to value mismatch where they think it's just going to give us millions of dollars of benefit, but we only have $10,000 to invest in it, is you might be talking to the wrong person. And if that's the case, you need to double check where it is, how you got in front of them, and follow that flow of money. And I think I brought this up before. If you're swimming against the tide in the flow of money, you are losing impact. You're going to get delegated down, and then it is hard for you to come up with the right solution for your client. Somebody asked, Greg, who do you like to talk to? And I say, I spend a lot of time talking to investors and bankers. And the reason is because they have money. And then when they refer me, they're generally referring me like I'm following the flow of money. It comes from them to the businesses that they invest in. Those business owners take those meetings. When I go the other way, I've got a friend who is a life insurance. He's a very super successful life insurance agent. Everybody loves him. He makes gobs of money, provides tons of value to clients, does wonderful things for them. But every referral, it's about a 25% hit rate as to whether or not the referral actually takes my call. And the reason is because the money's going the wrong way, right? The client is, the money is flowing from the client to my life insurance customer. And then I'm trying to swim against that to get up to him. So when you want to talk to, if you find yourself in a situation where you think you're talking to the wrong person, step back. And my advice is to find a way in where you can actually follow the money into the top people. If it flows down, that's great. But if it flows across, that's great too, right? Peer level. You're a CEO of a 10,000 employee company. I'm a CEO of a 10,000 employee company. We'll probably listen to each other. In that case, the money can flow back and forth. So that's flow with the money, and that helps with overcoming the price objections. When it comes to setting price, complex sales, the nice thing about it is you don't really have to have a set published price, right? And to do that, you'll have to get good at ballparking. To have flexible pricing, you have to get good at ballparking. The way that most professional services have worked around this is they just continually try to increase their I have 0 clients at $0, and then so I've set my rate at $100 an hour, and then I get busy. And then when I'm fully busy, any new clients, they come in at a higher rate. I will lose some clients at my higher rate, but I will gain new clients because I now am proving that I'm worth more. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why I hate that model, but you can work the other way, which is by using ballparking and figuring out what the actual value is to the client, right? So, because that's one of the things we've been talking about, and it's probably a big idea that I should have led with, which is that you are unable to, you are not the person who can bring value to the client. We hear lots of talk about bring value and show them the value and do this. The value lies inside the client. All you can do is you can hope to uncover it, but you're never going to be able to really create it. And the reason for that is because that's just not how people work, right? Especially if you're saying it, nobody's ever going to believe you, but if it's intrinsic into them. So where does most value lie inside of companies? The value in any particular solution lies inside that company. It's to the company itself, but usually it's to the individual too, what it is that they're getting out of it. So the way to set price is to get good at ballparking price, right? Which is using that high level abstraction in the ballpark stage. So I think one of the better examples of effective use of ballparking is how CarMax uses, I don't even know if they do this on purpose, but if you're shopping for a used car on CarMax, one of the easiest ways to do it is to put in your ballpark price, right? You could say, I'm buying a car for my kid. I don't want to spend more than $20,000. And ideally I'd love to spend, less than 16, but I'm just going to, what can I even get for $16,000 to $20,000, right? That's a high level abstraction of, I have this much money I can spend on this, or that's a payment that I could possibly afford for my kid for a few years. And so what is out there that's in that price range? And then what it'll do is it'll pull back, it'll say, hey, there's 55,000 matches. And you can start to see what they are by car make, by type of car. Is it a little 4-wheel drive, or is it a sedan, or is it a sport coupe? And you can start knocking things out that way. And the reason that works as a great example of ballparking is because I did this for a car that I bought. And in the end, I kind of narrowed it down. I was like, I kind of literally like 3 of these cars. And then I could really start looking for those particular cars. I didn't end up buying it from CarMax. But once I had ballparked and I was like, it looks like it's about here. The car is is around 4 years old. And if I can find one for, with less than 30,000 miles on it, it'd be a bonus. You end up finding one, right? If you could find one for that has 10,000 miles on it and it's perfect, and it's maybe $2,500 out of that price range. So let's say that I use that 16 to 20 as a ballpark, and it's really 20 to 50. I may end up there, right? Because we're no longer talking about a high level of abstraction, what kind of car. We're really getting down to brass tacks of, I'm looking for a Ford Expedition, with all these bells and whistles, and I'm hoping to get it for, and I found one here and it's $22,500. It's a little out of my price range, but it's okay. It's still within the ballpark, and the ballpark to me is always within 50%. So that's my wife banging around back there, making herself some coffee, it sounds like. So the ballpark, as long as you're within 50%, you're usually pretty accurate. So if we say $50,000 and you come in at somewhere between 25 and 75, you're not that far off from the initial ballpark price. You just can't be wildly off. You can't say it's going to be $5,000 to $10,000 and then you show up at 100. People tend to freak out. So when you're ballparking, you should be able to set, a rough approximation of where you'll be. And again, should we proceed or should we not proceed, right? Somebody says, so you say, my projects are $50,000, and they say, God, I never do that. And that's your moment to step back and say, okay, so this may not be correct. Is there any reason for us to move forward with this, or should we start looking at a different way for you to solve this particular problem, right? That's better for the client. It's better for you because you can move on to the next thing when we do that. So that's ballparking price. Finalizing price, the details should reveal themselves once you've uncovered the objectives and you've put some value on that. I was doing surveys for a software product, and where you put that initial ballpark area will mean different things to different people, right? So I was doing a survey for a new software product, and the companies that I was surveying ranged in size from under 10 employees to over 5,000. So that mid-market, upper mid-market. And when we got down to, we asked a lot of questions about, would you be interested in this? And then once we had a yes or a maybe, we started using ballparking for price, right? And so to finalize price, what we had to do is, if this were free, would you be interested? And what was interesting is that under 10 employees, of course, or the smaller companies were absolutely, if it's free, that sounds perfect. We'd love to do that. It minimizes our risk, right? But when we said on the high end, like if it was $50,000, would you be interested? And some of those small companies were like, absolutely not. If I saw a price tag of that, I would know that that's not for me because it's just too risky. Not that I couldn't afford it. Everybody kind of went through their little justifications. It's not that I can't afford it, but but inside there, but the big companies, when I said free, they had the exact opposite reaction. They would say, oh, that, free, and, we'd have this, and oh, what if it was $50,000? Oh, okay, well, that sounds more reasonable. And we start asking, and in particular, this software went towards banking, and that banking world, that was one of their indicators, right, as to whether or not the solution was going to actually solve their problem, right? It was a quick little mnemonic device for them where they could say, oh, if it's under 50, they probably won't be able to meet our security protocols. But if it's over 50, there's a good chance that it will. We can continue the conversation. So that's where, if once you decide to finalize your price, right, that's with a lawyer. If you have a really big problem and the lawyer comes in at $75 an hour, you're going to question whether or not the lawyer's going to be able to fix your problem. If he comes in at $1,000 an hour, you pretty much expect if he's commanding those fees, he must be able to solve this particular big problem. So use that for finalizing price. The sixth tactic I have for you is around identifying buyers. And we were kind of talking about that with the flow of the money and the matching price to value. All these things kind of tie together. I'm trying to break them out, to tease them out into little pieces that you can use. But if you aim too low, right, and your price doesn't change, your value is never realized inside of a transaction. Working with, he's not a client, more of an acquaintance, but we were running through something he was very proud of, which was he's going through this new price transparency. Like, that's his tactic to compete in the marketplace. And so as we were digging through this price transparency, because you could, he built all these nifty calculators you could use on his website, and we were going through it. I was like, do those people really know? Like, do your buyers know what that is? Because there was a lot of other parts of the conversation I could relate to you. But let's just suffice to say, like, I'm working really hard. We're really busy. Things are really great. I wish there was more money in this. Oh, by the way, this is this is what we're doing. And I'm looking at it thinking, who understands these technical terms? Only low-level buyers, right? People with low budget priority in general, right? This is my mnemonic device or my cheat. I'm not even sure if I'm using mnemonic device correctly. My cheat of knowing whether or not, is if somebody understands all the detail, then chances are they are lower on the budget prioritization poll, as opposed to if they don't understand those details, except for in general, but they like to talk in big generalities, that tends to be somebody who can prioritize budget on that. So I asked if his buyer knew the detail or if the buyer glazed over when they saw a sheet like this, and he's like, oh, no, that's it. They absolutely understand, over 80%, the vast majority of my people understand exactly what it is, whatever acronym this is, they understand it. And so I said, oh, I didn't say this because he wasn't asking for advice, but I thought, well, this is where part of your busyness problems is coming from, is that you're aiming too low in the sales cycle. And if you could move up to where the people are not so involved in the details, you can talk more strategically and you could probably get a bigger solution in there. And so when I talk about identifying buyers, that is an area that I'm talking about, or that's a way to do it, is to realize that if you're talking, if they want to deal in high level abstractions, they probably are a budget prioritizer. If they are trying to delegate you down, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so or talk to so-and-so, and they're pushing you lower in the organization, you're probably talking to a budget prioritizer, and they are trying to send you down into somebody that they've already allocated budget to because they feel like that you're at that level. And so that's how they can manage that process too. So anyways, and the reason that's important to me, the reason that's important to you, is that in complex sales, vendors get replaced, but partners tend to get more opportunities to work together. So the lower you are in the organization, the more it usually feels like you are being labeled a vendor right? You're more tactical than you are strategic. Partners are strategic. So, and that's why I feel like it's going to happen to my friend. But that's okay. He'll figure it out. Let's get into tactic number 7 because I'm running out of time. Separating sales from marketing. This is that last graphic I want to deal with, and it's the marketing sales focus graphic and whether or not you should be working with marketing or sales. So the example is a firm, an accounting firm, called and asked me if they should hire a business development person or if I'd recommend sales training. And so when any of these questions pop up, I look at what the focus is, those orange labels below. So if we have marketing on one side, the left side, sales on the right side, and then a high marketing focus tends to be lower priced services versus higher priced services. That's more sales focused. So in their case, I would say if they're going after low level accounting issues, they could hire a business development person. Otherwise, they need to invest in training, which is on the sales side. Market sizes, are they going after a niche market? That's more sales training. But if the market is big and can be marketed, there's a lot of prospects to work through. That's a marketing issue. Is it to businesses or to consumers? If it's more B2B, it tends to be more sales focused than marketing focused. If it's more B2C, it tends to be more marketing focused over sales focused. And is the solution, if what they're talking about are the complex solutions, so like in this accounting firm, are they just, is it a one size fits all tax solution that's simple? That's more, that would be good for a business development person that isn't an accountant. And if not, if it's a complex solution, then they really need to invest in their people. I just introduced that grid because I think it's great for helping you make quick decisions on whether or not you need to put your emphasis on the marketing or sales end of your business. And that's really it. So I'm running a little bit over, and I maybe is a little disjointed. I apologize, but hopefully you got some good stuff out of it. The big ideas are we all want the same thing. They're 2 price discussion, and then your clients manage risk by price, and you manage risk by talking to more prospects. And the big thing is that the value is not in your control. Your price is always going to be too high for some and too low for others. And this applies to the other major resources too, right? Your solutions are going to be too labor intensive for some people, but it's going to be not labor intensive enough for others, right? They have more capacity. Your time frame is going to be too short for some and way too long for others. So your job is to find these things out, and that's how you get that's why I say it's not about the price. It's really about the solution. So your homework is from the 7 tactics. Let's pick one to start with. You can try matching price to value and see what happens when you're listening in these conversations. If you get one of these conversations, you can listen closely to hear is what they perceive the value of your solution is compared to what they're willing to pay for it. Is there a big mismatch there, or are they aligned? You can try to wait on a referral. So if you get a nice referral to somebody, take a step back and say, where is the money flow in this referral? Is it a peer-to-peer referral? Is it one coming from where I'm following the money down from the referrer to the referral, or am I working my way up against the flow on there? Or maybe you can start thinking about how the best to start ballparking price on your most common questions and services. Yeah. So the big thing is just do something this week. It's all about being human, because selling discussions are about helping both sides, right? Yours and theirs. If your no and your yes are equivalent, you have an opportunity to find a solution that works for everybody, which includes a lot of walking away, because early on you can ballpark your resources and you can find out that it's just not going to be a match, and that everybody would be best off talking to somebody else. So how's that? It's overcoming price objections through avoidance. As always, if you have questions, give me a call. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will talk to you later. Bye.